This is the brand new Sony A7V, an upgrade to the A7 IV in almost every single way, but as we know, competition these days is pretty stiff, so does it match up to the competition? Let's check it out. So right off the bat, the biggest thing that this new camera has is going to be this new 33 megapixel, which yes, is the same amount of megapixels as in the A7 IV, but it is going to be a partially stacked sensor, which makes things a lot faster and introduces a lot more options for new features. It also has a brand new processor that's actually going to be different from the other kind of like AI processors. It's going to have something that is more integrated within to that single processor, making things a lot more streamlined. And not that the A7 IV was bad with autofocus at all, it was pretty darn good, but this just has a lot of those same, I don't know, expectations that I get out of even something that is very, very sports focused like the Alpha 9 Mark III. One of the things that is sometimes a downside to a partially stacked sensor and that kind of speed trade-off is sometimes you have an image quality kind of degradation there. And for what I've been told, you actually are seeing improvements in a lot of the areas. So one of the things that they have mentioned is that it's supposed to have better dynamic range and also seems to be really good in low light. But one of the biggest things that especially a lot of us event photographers are going to be really, really interested in is going to be that fast sensor readout, giving us the ability to actually use a silent or electronic shutter at a usable range. So I know that many people that are watching a video like this might already know this, but the way that a sensor reads out normally is going to be line by line from the top to the bottom. It's called rolling shutter for the reason it just kind of like warps as it goes. The slower the sensor reads out, the more of that kind of wobble you're gonna get, especially if your camera is moving back and forth. And it's one of the things that the Alpha 9 Mark III has that is just incredible. It has a global shutter, meaning that it reads out all at once, but this is pretty much the only commercially available stills camera that does that. And it's one of the things that's on my A7R5. It does, it has the availability to do an electronic shutter, but if you have any movement, there is just so much warping. And it's one of the things I didn't actually like about the A7 IV as well, is that that sensor readout was pretty slow. So one of the things I wanted to do was compare the current cameras that I already have to this to show off the differences in rolling shutter. And then also shout out to my friend Jonathan, who let me borrow his A7 IV for just a few shots to kind of show the difference there. There's two things that you can see here between the A7 V and the A7 IV. The first is obviously going to be that angle that you're getting that warping, that distortion from the rolling shutter. And then the second is actually really interesting as well, because I was in like these probably either fluorescent or LED lights that were having a refresh rate that was much slower than the shutter speed. Another issue that we often run into as photographers, especially in ambient light. And you can see on the A7 IV readout that there are just a ton of those bars. It took a lot longer of a time, so you saw more of that refresh as the sensor went down. And on the A7 V, you can see that there are far fewer of those kind of like color changing bars that obviously work off of a light's refresh rate. So basically by you see that, you can see really, really obviously that the sensor readout is so much faster on here. And one of the things that I did was that other than a few test shots, I put this camera in electronic shutter mode and just used the electronic shutter the whole time. So every photo that you're seeing in this, unless I say otherwise, everything was taken with the electronic shutter because I really wanted to know if that's going to be a viable option for people. I know that when I was in the kind of like press briefing for this camera, one of the things that I actually mentioned was that the A7 IV has some issues. I have friends that have taken hundreds of thousands of photos with that camera and have kind of run it into the ground. I've seen a lot of people at around 150,000 shutter clicks that the shutter has just broken on them because they've just used it so much. So two giant things that are really cool about this. It inherits a lot of the more pro level features of the body of the A7R5, one of which actually being the shutter mechanism. It's not in any of the spec sheets that you're going to hear about, like probably no one else is going to talk about it, but the shutter in here is actually rated for almost more than double the amount of photos. So if you are someone that is going to use this in all mechanical shutter and you're going to take like 400, 500,000 photos, you actually should be good on this. But the thing they did say in the press briefing when I brought that up is like, yes, this is going to be a lot more usable for a lot longer of a time. In mechanical shutter, the shutter just is rated for many more clicks, but they were basically just saying like most people we're expecting them to use this in electronic shutter because it's going to be so useful. Even in like the photos that I showed that are in this burst mode and things, I don't really see any warping, even ones that I'm panning and moving quickly. So I know a lot of photographers that one of the reasons they actually spent the money to buy an A9 III was that they had that silent shutter option. And now you have the ability for the vast majority of people to use the A7V as well in silent shutter, especially for those times during like wedding ceremonies or speeches or just the times you want to be a little bit more sensitive to the sound you're making. It's really useful. But I do think for the most part, you can totally get away with using this on electronic shutter. I know a lot of wedding photographers that use the A7 IV series as their primary photography camera. And one of the things that I know that a lot of them also want is the ability to use a silent shutter. And so hats off to Sony for making something like this that is in their kind of more prosumer body, but I know a lot of professionals are using, and it's a huge feature that a lot of people have been wanting to get. And I think a lot of people didn't expect to be able to get out of, a body that's going to be like under $3,000. Now, another couple features that are really, really useful for a lot of people. One of them is going to be pre-capture. I personally don't use that, but I know that a lot of people love to use pre-capture for birding and other things where you're like waiting for a moment to happen. And then as that moment happens, you don't want to miss it. So you can record up to a second before the moment you actually hit the shutter, as long as the shutter is half pressed. And the way that works is it's literally just like buffering those images and dumping them as soon as it gets to the end of the buffer. So it can be something that would be really, really helpful if you're worried about missing a moment. Maybe you are someone that is newer to weddings and you're a little bit worried about maybe missing that first kiss or something like that. You can add pre-capture on there. You're going to end up with a lot more extra photos that you don't need, but better to have more photos that you don't need than not the photo you do need, correct? So it is one of the things that you only see in mostly higher end bodies up until now, and it's available on here. And then the other thing is that you have a 10 frames per second max kind of burst speed in mechanical shutter. Back when I was doing professional sports photography, even most of the pro cameras are still like under 10 frames a second. So having even 10 is great, but the ability to use this is now available at 30 frames a second with like full autofocus, full everything, and you're not losing bit depth. I know a lot of other companies, once you kind of dump it into electronic shutter mode, sometimes you're losing, your bit depth from maybe 14 bits to 12 bits or something, at least from what I've been told. And I know that Lightroom doesn't have the profiles and things like that, so I haven't been able to fully test it yet. You are still getting 14-bit RAWs out of any of the electronic shutter modes. So for those moments, especially as a sports photographer or something like that, like which I, again, have a background of, the ability to shoot things at 30 frames a second is pretty incredible, especially on a camera like this. And again, you don't lose any autofocus or exposure or anything like that issues when you're doing that. So I know for a lot of people that is going to be super, super useful. Now, the body also has a bunch of ergonomic improvements on it over the A7 IV as well. And again, a lot of things they borrowed from the A7R5. The first of which being this screen. One of the most annoying things when I was dual using the A7 IV and the A7R5 was that I would pull out this camera, the A7R5, and I would have this amazing 5-axis tilt screen. And then I would go to the A7 IV and I would pull it up, and then I would only be able to flip the screen out and do this. I know that's like the standard for a camera of this kind of a range, this prosumer style camera, but it was a huge benefit for me, just like a quality of life thing. It's just a little bit less of an annoyance. And so now that they have this same screen on here, I really love having the screen on the same axis as the lens when I'm doing photography. And even when I'm doing video, to be honest, like having it off to the side is just it's just not a good experience for me. I think that being able to have a screen that tilts out like this off to the side, if you want to like vlog or see yourself, when I'm filming myself on one of these cameras and I have it on a tripod somewhere, then yeah, like I'm going to have it stick out because I want to be able to monitor myself and make sure I'm in frame and focus, all that kind of stuff. But I use these primarily as the primary operator of the camera. And so the ability to have this be right here as a more compact setup, it's right on axis, so I'm not like having a weird kind of parallax thing going on. Huge improvement. And to be honest, it's something that I didn't expect them to put into this camera, but I'm so glad they did because it's just a massive quality of life improvement. And I don't think that a lot of other manufacturers are going to put that style of thing in their kind of like prosumer camera. Obviously, I'm really excited about that in this camera in particular. One of the things they didn't do, though, is that they didn't add or kind of update the EVF here. And it's one of those things that it's fine. Like, it's a fine EVF. It's not a bad EVF at all. If I take this camera out by itself and I'm using this camera and I'm using this EVF, I have no complaints. So the EVFs in both of these and then the Alpha 1 series as well, they just have much bigger and higher resolution EVFs. So let's say I'm using an A7V or an A7 IV for that matter, and something like an A9 III or the A7R5. When I pull this camera up to my face, it's just such a better experience. It's much larger, just like your eye it fills way more of the room. And then if you pull this up directly after it, you really do notice the difference. It's one of those things where like, it would have been nice for them to, increase the size a little bit, maybe increase the resolution. But again, it's one of those things, if you're not going back and forth directly between one of these other cameras, you're not going to notice it. But if you do go back and forth, you will notice it. So kind of is what it is. Now, one of the things that I never ran into with the A7 IV, but I know a lot of people have talked about it and a lot of people ran into issues with it, was overheating. That camera, the A7 IV, never overheated on me, but I know that it did overheat for other people. They have not added any active cooling or anything like that. There's no fan on this, but it does borrow, again, more features from the A7R5 in that it has like a passive cooling system in here. So it has a heat sink and a way to help dissipate the heat within the camera. I've used this for wedding ceremonies in 8K. I've used it in all sorts of other scenarios and things. I've never had this camera overheat. And so Sony seems to be pretty darn confident that this camera won't overheat in most other areas as well. And this is probably going to be a good, decent transition into the video specs. But one of the things that they've claimed, at least here, is that you're going to be able to get at least 90 minutes at 4K 60. 4K 60 is uncropped in here. And then at over 100 degrees, you're able to shoot for an hour, at least, on this as well. But it does mean that if you wanted to be a videographer and you wanted to use this as your primary camera, you most likely be able to do it in most situations because the ability to shoot like a full hour long thing in 4K 60 on this camera is something that seems like it's available. And speaking of video, it's going to be the thing that I know a lot of people are going to compare to other cameras in the industry and say, just a little underwhelming. If you compare this directly to the A7 IV, you're going to be very, very, very happy with the image quality. You're still getting a 7K oversampled image down to 4K. You now have the ability to do 4K 120 in APS-C crop mode. And again, you have 4K 60 in full frame, which is something that I know a lot of videographers out there, that's just like the thing that they're doing at all times is 4K 60. So this camera is able to do that as well. I think the thing that a lot of people are going to be bummed about are the two different things. First of all, there's no open gate. So if you're not aware, open gate is the idea that it's actually using the full 3x2 sensor instead of only the kind of 16:9 middle portion of that sensor. I'm actually filming this on the Lumix S5 II, and that camera has a lower megapixel sensor, but I'm shooting this in, I think, 5.9K or 6K open gate. So it gives me the ability to see a little bit more of the scene. If I want to crop this in or punch in, I'm going, getting more resolution, and I'm getting more on the vertical end so that if I wanted to convert this into an Instagram reel or something like that, I just have more vertical space to do so. Now, this thing has a really fast processor. It also has a high resolution sensor. So it seems like it should be something they could do, even if they limited it to 4K 24 or 4K 30, or I guess it would be 6K 24, 6K 30 or something like that. It seems like something they should be able to do. I obviously am not an engineer, but I know that a lot of much cheaper cameras, even like the Lumix S9, I can shoot open gate on that camera, and that camera is well under $2,000. So it just seems like something that they should be able to do, and I'm honestly hoping that they can do in a firmware update at some point. It honestly seems like this might be something that they're holding back on a little bit. Maybe they're waiting for the FX3 Mark II or some other camera to be able to have those kind of more cinematic features or whatever first, and then maybe some of those features will be able to trickle down in a firmware update later. So it's one of the things that I think that I'm not necessarily disappointed, but it's I wish that this had it. And especially if you're looking into the R6 III or the Z6 III, from Canon and Nikon, it's something that those cameras have over this camera. But would this, for me at least, be a deterrent not to buy this camera because it doesn't have that? No, that's not going to affect my decision. I think that I would be more inclined maybe to purchase it because it'd be another tool in the tool set. But I don't think it's as big of a deal as a lot of people are going to make it out to be, at least for me. But I do think it's something that Sony needs to address and needs to put in future cameras at some point. And again, I hope this trickles down to this camera and any other camera like the A9 III eventually as well. Now, one of the other things that this body has that none of the other cameras have is that we actually get, finally, 2 USB-C ports. So you can charge with one, you can data transfer with the other. They are not the same port on both, so you need to actually look at it and go which one's going to have faster data transfer speeds. But I believe both do offer PD charging. So if you are offloading stuff to a computer, you don't need to have a dummy battery or something like that. You can just plug 2 USB-C ports into this, or 2 USB-C chargers, and be able to connect to a computer and to a charger or something like that. And it's just so nice because who is using a USB mini or whatever these things, micro USB? I don't know. It's 2025. Finally, we're getting rid of those ports and we're allowing just a much more usable dual USB-C port. So overall, this thing is really fantastic. A very worthy upgrade to the A7 IV. I think that a lot of people are going to be really happy with this. It has a few things that you don't even necessarily need. I know a lot of my friends aren't going to be using the 30 frames per second, but it is one of those things that's really nice to be able to use when needed. But I think the main thing for photographers and even for videographers is going to be that faster sensor readout. You're just able to do so much more. It's the thing that really bothered me about using the A7 IV for video, was just that really laggy, really rolling shutter look. And it's the reason I never use the A7R5, or I never really use the A7 IV in electronic shutter. And from my looks here at the images that I've been using, for the most part, I would be totally fine using this in electronic shutter. And what I would probably do, to be honest, if you're the person that's thinking about picking up one of these cameras, is I would either assign a button to the electronic shutter so you can turn it on and off, or I would maybe put one of the custom modes in here to 1 or 2 or something like that, and you can switch it back and forth. I just moved the C3 button, which usually is kind of the focus selection button, and I just made this to be the ability to switch between electronic and manual shutter. So overall, a ton of really good upgrades. Do I think this is worth it and worth the price upgrade? I think absolutely. I personally would pay $300-400 just for this alone. So the fact that you're getting that, you're getting much more usable video, you're getting the ability to use electronic shutter, you're getting 30 frames a second if you ever want that. It just is a really good upgrade overall. And despite the price increase, personally, I would 100% buy this camera, and it could do almost everything. It is just such a good mix between the cameras that I currently have. 33 megapixels is a really good amount. It gives you a little bit of room for cropping and allows just a lot of flexibility in post. It has a lot of the fast features, like a faster sensor like the A9 III, and then it has the body and a lot of the dynamic range benefits and stuff of the A7R5. So this kind of is like the perfect little jack of all trades camera from Sony. So I think it's, again, a really, really worthy upgrade that I think a lot of people should make. So thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, where you think it fits in the market, all those kinds of things. If you are interested in purchasing this camera or any of the other stuff that I've talked about, I'll leave links in the description down below. And then subscribe if you haven't already. While I am sending this camera back, I'm going to be requesting it again so that I can compare it more directly to the A7 IV. I can compare it more directly to the A7R5 and other cameras as we move forward, and I get a production model that I can actually use Lightroom RAW files and things like that, do a better comparison eventually. And if you want to check out my video on the A7R5, you can do that up here. Check out my video comparing the A7R5 to the A7 IV up here, and I will see you in one of those.